Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Greetings to all of you. I'm Hugh Hewitt. And of course, it is Thursday, May 14th, in the year of the virus 2020. 84,765 Americans have died as a result of the virus, 1,705 yesterday. 1,420,000 Americans have it. Now, I have been doing a bit of a dive into the numbers this morning from the CDC. And it turns out that through May 13th, and again, yesterday, there have been a total of 459 deaths attributed to the virus in people under 35. Now, their total number of deaths is different than the number I just quoted you, 84,000. That comes from public sources that compile it in different ways. The CDC, lower than that, but the CDC says from their reporting, 459 people under the age of 35 have died. Another 973 people have died because of the virus who were between the ages of 35 and 45. So you've got about 1,500 people under the age of 45 who have died because of the virus. Each one of them tragic, each one of them leaving a family and tears, memories, and what ifs. But has any public policy adapted to this data? I'm not saying it should. I am just curious if any of it has. We'll talk with a couple of senators today. Senator John Thune, Thom Tillis, Chuck Todd's coming by, Lt.Gen Deptula, Jim Talent's going to be here, Michael Oren from Israel. Let me break this down for you. Every day I wake up, there are four crises. There's a medical crisis, there's an economic crisis, there's a political crisis in the United States around the rule of law, which just went crazy yesterday. And there's a world crisis around the Communist Chinese Party. On the medical crisis side, we saw the rollout of remdesivir hampered. There isn't enough of it, and they're trying to figure out where to send it. We understand shortages. That will ramp up. We have learned from Spain this morning, according to the Financial Times, that only 5% of the country's 47 million people have had the disease. There's not going to be herd immunity anytime soon. Forget that. That's not happening. Even in a country like Spain, which has been just smashed by the virus, they're not going to get herd immunity. Big story in the Telegraph from Great Britain. Australia has been the lucky country. Relatively low death rate, relatively low infection rate. 7,000 cases, fewer than 100 deaths in a country of 25 million people. How did they do it? They just jumped on it and they shut their borders down. The economic crisis is going to be prolonged. The Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell delivered a stark warning yesterday, according to the New York Times, that this economic hit is without a modern precedent. More aid would be necessary. According to the Financial Times, he said the fiscal stimulus would be worth it. Again, I'll talk with the senators about that, but what Nancy Pelosi proposed, cash for cannabis, that's not happening. The real big story this morning is the political crisis, and we are in a political crisis. More than 39, well, actually not more, actually 39 different Obama administration officials requested unmasking of Michael Flynn at the end of the administration. It's so breathtaking. And I have to explain this. There are perhaps a handful of people out there who have ever held, in the media, talking to you today, somewhere, a talking head, somewhere on television or radio or in the newspaper writing a column. There are a handful of us who've actually held top secret, sensitive, compartmented information clearances, the highest clearance the government can give you. There are a few of us out there. And there's a very, very tiny subset, I'm aware of 3, of whom I am one, who have actually processed Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act applications for warrants. There are a whole bunch more who have actually seen the intelligence. And what happens is that the government requests and receives the authority to surveil foreigners in the country. And those foreigners in the country, just imagine the United Kingdom's ambassador. How many Americans do you think that ambassador interacts with? I'm not saying we surveil that ambassador. We probably do. I'm not saying we do, but we definitely surveil the Russian ambassador and the People's Republic of China's ambassador and consul general. I had dinner with the People's Republic of China's consul general in Los Angeles probably 3 months ago. Probably surveilled. So they'll report that conversation. They'll record it. Maybe it'll get reported. And my name would be redacted. Ambassador Ping is his name. Had dinner with blank. The following was said by blank. Ambassador Ping said this. And any official in the United States government with cause can request the National Security Agency to unmask who that person is that was talking to Ping. You would do that if the person talking to Ping was requesting that Ping receive stolen goods involving intellectual property lifted from the University of California. On the other hand, you wouldn't do that if you were talking about the fact that I can't use chopsticks. Right? That's not really justified. Well, 39 people asked about Flynn's conversation with Kislyak, and that is just remarkable. There are two editorials today. Meanwhile, Judge Sullivan has gone off of the rails. He's the judge who has totally bollocksed up the Flynn case. I think he's embarrassed. Personally, I believe he's embarrassed by how badly he's handled this. I believe his incompetence is showing through. I believe his fits of anger put him in a category with Manny Real, who's long gone to the Lord out in L.A. There's some judges. He had a fine reputation until the last couple of years, and I think Judge Sullivan is old. By the way, you can still criticize judges in the United States. They can't arrest you, as far as I know. And I'm retired from the active practice of law, although I'm a member of the District of Columbia Bar, and I remain the general counsel of the Nixon Foundation. I advise a few people privately on what to do, but I ain't going before Judge Sullivan's court. Let me just say this. He's lost it. He has absolutely lost it. The Department of Justice, which has sole prosecutorial authority for federal crimes, sole, judges do not order prosecution, has moved under Rule 48 of the Rules of Criminal Procedure to dismiss the case against Michael Flynn. The reason is right in front of you. It's in Exhibit 4, wrongdoing by the FBI. Wrongdoing. I'm not saying he didn't lie. He did lie to the vice president. I'm not saying he didn't represent Turkey. He did represent Turkey. I'm saying that there was prosecutorial misconduct as evidenced in Exhibit 4, the Sally Yates conversation with the special counsel. And if you don't see that, you're blind. So the DOJ took a look at that, and a career prosecutor said, we've got to walk away from this one. So they made the motion, a Rule 48 motion, which is automatic. There is precedent, which controls. It's not Four Corners precedent. It's not a Rule 48 motion. It's a different motion. It's a case it's a 2016 case. Judge Sullivan has no authority to do other than dismiss the case. Instead, he's requested anyone who's got an opinion to file their opinion, and he's appointed a friend of the court to act as an advocate for keeping Judge Flynn tortured as he is. And I use that not physically tortured, but mentally and emotionally tortured. This is an assault on civil liberties, the like of which I have not seen. And Judge Sullivan should be embarrassed. He is embarrassing the bar. It's a scandal on the court, and I hope the Department of Justice and Judge Flynn take an interlocutory appeal and get this removed from Judge Sullivan, who is out of control and needs to be rebuked. Absolutely out of control and needs to be rebuked. He is an embarrassment to district courts everywhere in the United States, because we are a country of laws, not of judges. Meanwhile, there are two editorials at the Wall Street Journal, the Flynn Unmaskers Unmasked and Judge Sullivan's Bad Judgment. Let me read them for you. Here is the latter. If the prosecution and the defense both want to drop a case, can a federal judge refuse and sentence the defendant anyway? The easy call should be no, which makes all the more bizarre federal Judge Emmett Sullivan's decision Tuesday to invite outside briefs in the Michael Flynn case. Judge Sullivan refused to grant the Justice Department's request to drop the prosecution, and thus Mr. Flynn's guilty plea, after Justice discovered that exculpatory evidence had been denied to the defense. The judge invited comment from people outside the case. That's just bizarre. Which amounts to de facto outsourcing of the prosecution to partisan legal analysts who want Mr. Flynn to hang because he worked for President Trump. One such band calls itself the Watergate Prosecutors, who includes Nick Ackerman. When Donald Trump Jr. released emails related to a meeting with Russian lawyer at Trump Tower, Mr. Ackerman declared him guilty of outright treason. As special counsel Robert Mueller report showed, the Trump Tower meeting amounted to nothing. Judge Sullivan doesn't normally ask others to write his decision, so what's the point in this case? I'll tell you what the rest of the editorial says when we come back. But Judge Sullivan, wake up and resign and get rid of this case, and I sure hope the D.C. Circuit steps in. I'll be right back, America. Stay tuned to the Hugh Hewitt Show. Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. I'm reading the Wall Street Journal editorial just blasting Judge Sullivan, who has General Flynn in front of him. Remember, the prosecution and the defense agree the case should be dismissed. The judge refuses to do so. He said, ollie, ollie, in free, everyone file what you want. Then he's appointed a judge to argue the case against it. It's incredible. It's nuts. The Journal continues, this is a criminal case subject to the normal rules of evidence that were clearly violated by Mr. Mueller's prosecutorial team. Our friends at the New York Sun speculate that Judge Sullivan may want to keep the prosecution going for a few months so a Biden Justice Department could revive it. We hope that's wrong. Though we do recall that Judge Sullivan some months back in open court asked prosecutors if Mr. Flynn might have been charged with treason. One issue here is the role of the judge in the U.S. system, which is to adjudicate cases and controversies, not to supplant the prosecutorial duty of the executive branch. There's also the matter of simple fairness. Mr. Flynn has endured 3 years of public trial because he was caught up in the Russian collusion allegations that turned out to be based on nothing more than Russian disinformation. Justice now says Mr. Flynn's statements to the FBI weren't criminal because the interview lacked any investigative legal basis. And in any case, the agents at the time said they didn't believe that he was lying. Is it serving the cause of justice to keep Mr. Flynn hanging for many years, more months, so partisan op-ed writers can influence Judge Sullivan's thinking? Judge Sullivan's judgment is all the more disappointing because he had enjoyed a reputation for holding prosecutors accountable for their obligation to turn over Brady material, evidence that could be exculpatory to the defense. If Judge Sullivan insists on Mr. Flynn's continued prosecution, even as prosecutors conclude the facts don't support it, he will likely be overturned on appeal. Yes, but that will torture the general longer. This is a travesty. It's a travesty. And there ought to be an interlocutory appeal. And I think the bar should sanction Judge Sullivan. I don't know how you do it. I think the Chief Justice should get involved. It is an embarrassment, a scandal on the federal judicial system. And I know there are 2,000 former DOJ lawyers out there running around from the left wing saying, oh, Barr is a horrible person. That might be the case. You can hold that opinion. There are just as many saying Barr is a genius. That's where I am. I think he's a genius. But okay, so you got a bunch of different opinions coming out of that. There is no difference of opinion on Rule 48. This has never happened. Never happened. Now, there are some instances where you can imagine it happening. If the judge thought that the prosecutor had snuck in there, let's say bribed by a Mexican cartel and wanted to let some cartel boss go and move to dismiss, you might say, wait a minute, what the hell's going on? But this is not that. This is the most studied case in America. And if you read Exhibit 4, Sally Yates' declaration, you'll say, wow, did they screw Flynn? And you realize that Judge Sullivan, I just think he's off the rails. I think he's an older man, and I would take the case away from him. Let me check the markets, shall I? Brought to you by Birch Gold. Look, what Jerome Powell said yesterday, more trillions are coming. We're hosing down the world with printed money. Let's just face it. What does printed money do? It drives out the value of the money that exists already. And we're trying to get inflation going again. We're trying to get the economy re-geared. And light crude's up to $27 a barrel this morning. That's very good. And gold is up to $17.26. You've got to diversify your retirement portfolio, not for next week, not for next year, but for the next 20 years. You've got to have some gold in it. You've got to have some precious metals in it, 10%, 15%. Give a call or get in touch with Birch Gold via hughgold.com or text my name, Hugh, to 474747. They'll walk you through it. They just take a portion of your 401k, your retirement saving, or they'll sell you gold direct that you can put in your safety deposit box. But have some diversification. Overseas, everything is red last night. Yesterday, the Dow was down 516 points. The NASDAQ was off 139. The S&P was down 50. Well, overnight, Japan caught up. It went down 1.75 point. Hong Kong went down 1.5%. England is open very badly today, down 2.35%. And Germany's down 1.81%. All I can tell you is that Amazon yesterday went up $10. There are some bright spots in the world of hurt that the worldwide economy is in. We got to reopen. We have to reopen or the world will starve. I mean, you just can't do this. We have given our hospitals time to adjust. We've gotten some therapies out there. We know who's vulnerable. We know who to protect, but we cannot stay closed. I'll be right back, America. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you by Prison Fellowship's Angel Tree Summer Camps. Click on the banner at hughhewitt.com.
Welcome back, America. Good Thursday morning to you on May 14th, the year of the plague, 2020. As I told you, according to public sources, 84,765 Americans have died in the virus or of virus-related comorbidities, 1,705 new deaths yesterday. But in examining the CDC data today, I find the most intriguing subset of the data, and about which there has been very little public conversation, that of all those thousands and thousands of deaths, only 459 have occurred in people under the age of 35. Just think about that. That's less than 10 per state. 459 people under the age of 35. Between 35 and 45, another almost 1,000 people, 973, have died. So you've got about 1,500 people who have died under the age of 45. And for this, and does any public policy reflect this yet? Do we have schools open being taught by people who are 40 and under? Do we have airplane flights that are limited to people who are 45 and under? Do we have airplane flights that are limited to the medically fragile, like we have supermarket hours? Do we not understand that age and a couple of comorbidities, especially weight and high blood pressure, are the killers here? People get sick. A lot of people get sick, and it's not pleasant. I've known a couple of people who've had it. I don't know them well, and I haven't been near them, but I wouldn't want to get it. I've got asthma. I'm in great shape. I can do, as I'll tell you, I did 4 miles yesterday. Not 8, but 4, and I'll probably do 4 again today. It's a light week after 2 very long weeks. But I just think the medical crisis has got to begin to come to grips that we can't stay shuttered. We just can't. Or the economic crisis will take far more lives than the medical crisis. The political crisis in the country revolves around both Judge Sullivan's incredibly irresponsible, malignant, and deeply disreputable scandal that he is doing. And I've read to you the Wall Street Journal editorial, Judge Sullivan's bad judgment. I'd encourage you to go and send it everywhere. Now I want to go to the unmasking scandal. This is the Wall Street Journal this morning on Judge Flynn and the unmasking. The Flynn unmaskers unmasked. Now we know who knew about the Russian calls, including Joe Biden. It's from the editorial board. It posted last night at 7:17 p.m. It's in this morning's Wall Street Journal. When news stories appeared in early 2017 about Michael Flynn's conversations with Russia's ambassador to the U.S., these columns wondered how Mr. Flynn's call was so widely known. The names of private U.S. citizens caught on tape by U.S. intelligence are supposed to be, quote, masked, so their privacy is protected. Well, now we know. GOP Senators Chuck Grassley and Ron Johnson on Wednesday released a declassified list of Obama administration officials who, in their waning days in power, unmasked the conversations of Mr. Flynn, who is set to become President Trump's national security advisor. It seems everyone but the night janitor wanted to know who Mr. Flynn was talking to. A stunning 39 separate officials snooped on Mr. Flynn's conversations with foreign actors, lodging nearly 50 unmasking demands between November 30, 2016 and January 12, 2017. Understand, again, this is the transition. This is the crime. We believe in the seamless, peaceful, cooperative transition of power between presidents and their team. But between November 30th, 3 weeks after the stunning upset that no one saw coming, in January 12th, 50 different demands for unmasking from 39 different people occurred. Our sources say the nearly dozen redacted names on the list are likely intelligence types who might have a legit interest in knowing who their foreign targets were speaking to in the U.S. But most of the rest are partisan officials who had no business spying on their successors. Again, they're running out of time. They have no authority. They have no power. They're not going to launch an investigation. They're not going to save the United States. They're getting dirt. The list includes then White House Chief of Staff Dennis McDonough, then Vice President Joe Biden, then Secretary of the Treasury Jacob Lew, Ambassador to the UN and Obama confidant Samantha Power made no fewer than 7 requests, though she told Congress she had no recollection of unmasking Mr. Flynn. Mr. Flynn was unmasked by at least 4 U.S. ambassadors, 6 Treasury officials, and people connected to the Energy and Justice Department and NATO, among others. The FBI Director James Comey, then CIA Director John Brennan, then the Director of National Intelligence James Clapper were on the list. This means they had access to the transcripts of any phone conversations that Mr. Flynn had with foreign sources as he prepared to take power. The media cordon sanitaire that protects Democrats will say this is no big deal because unmasking is routine and legal. But if the masking rule means nothing in practice, why pretend it exists? The Flynn unmasking is important because it occurred amid a media frenzy over supposed Trump campaign collusion with Russia. Leaks to the Washington Post about the conversations between the Russian ambassador and both Mr. Flynn and soon-to-be Attorney General Jeff Sessions were played up as central to the collusion scandal. There was no collusion. All right, there was none. They caused Mr. Sessions to recuse himself from the Russia probe and Mr. Flynn to be fired. While unmasking is not illegal, leaking intelligence is. There are other dots to connect. Documents released last week show that former Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates first learned about the Flynn wiretapping from no less than President Barack Obama in a January 5th, 2017 Oval Office meeting. At that time, she was the acting Attorney General. At least one of the unmaskers must have told Mr. Obama. The dates of the unmaskings raise further questions. The FBI's interest in Mr. Flynn was supposedly triggered by conversations starting on December 29, 2016, yet Mr. Flynn was first unmasked a month earlier, shortly after Mr. Trump named him security advisor. The McDonough unmasking takes place on January 5, 2017, the day of the Oval Office meeting in which Mr. Flynn was discussed. Mr. Biden's unmasking request was made on January 12, 2017, the same day the Washington report on the Flynn-Russia conversation. Mr. Biden has some explaining to do. All of this is fodder for U.S. Attorney John Durham as he tries to unmask the origins of the Russian collusion political ambush. The Flynn unmaskings and the timely media leaks take the story into the Obama White House. The peaceful transition of power is a hallmark of American democracy, or at least it used to be. It isn't supposed to be an opportunity for the administration that lost the election to cripple its successor as they take power. The Journal's got it right. It's exactly what I said. Obamagate is the intentional interference with the peaceful, seamless, cooperative transition of power that is the glory of the Republic, and it's everywhere, and it stinks, it stinks, it stinks. Is it criminal? The leaking is criminal. There may be a conspiracy in here. I don't know. I will wait for Durham. But hurry up, Mr. Durham. And it all conflates with Judge Sullivan as well, who you look over there, who apparently isn't reading the news, who apparently is clueless. And I'm really beginning to wonder, do we have to run a test on his ability to process cognitively what is in front of him? Making bizarre rulings with no precedent in contravention of standing D.C. Circuit Court cases that aren't 4 corners but are 3.5. On point, dismiss the case. And I hope that DOJ files an interlocutory appeal. No one on the left is going to tell you this, right? You're not going to see this on television. You're going to have to listen to me, and you're going to have to. And I do not go in for conspiracy theories. You listen to me for 20 years. I've been on the air for 30 years. I don't believe in conspiracy theory. This stinks to high heaven. What do I think? I think someone on Team Obama or within the FBI seeded requests among all their buddies to request the unmasking to cover their own trail so that the intelligence is out there. The Flynn transcript is everywhere. It's all over the place. It's fool's gold. It's all over the mine. They have seeded the mine. So everyone's got the Flynn intelligence, and they won't be able to track who gave it to Dave Ignatius. Well, one thing I would do if I was running one of those little maps with the thread that connects up the mob family, I'd try and find out which people do all of these people have in common. All right, who's at the middle of all this web? I don't think it's Susan Rice, because she sent herself a memo to the file on the day of the inauguration saying, oh, we were supposed to do this all by the book, nothing to see here. I think she was worried. I think she was really worried that someone would figure out, how did 39 people come to request the Michael Flynn transcript unmasking? Was someone asking them to do that in order to throw up enough dirt in the air to keep their identity covered? I don't know. John Durham's going to find out. You know what I think is also going to happen? Someone who's involved in this crap has already gone to Durham. I don't know if there's a grand jury sitting. I hope I don't know about it. But somebody's already gone to him. Somebody's singing. And that's what happened in Watergate, and that's what's going to happen here. That's what I think. Now, meanwhile, I want you to hear what Trey Gowdy said to Bill Hemmer, cut number 12.
Well, the first call I made, Bill, was to Devin Nunes. It validates what Devin said and did in early 2017. You know, unmasking names without sufficient factual legal predicate is a serious abuse of power. But the leaking of that masked name and the dissemination of that name to the media is actually a felony. And Devin tried like the Dickens to get this information from the current administration, from some of the intelligence officials, and we got some of the numbers. But he should have had all of this information. And my question for the FBI is, how's your leak investigation going? It's been 4 years. It's been 4 years. How's your leak investigation going?
Sir, how would you determine who leaked the name?
Well, first of all, the sphere of suspects is way too big because too many people have the power to unmask, but you're guaranteed not to get the right answer.
That's what happened. This was a plan to cover tracks. But I think Durham has the resources to get to it. Let me talk about resources. Angel Tree takes care of the children of people who are imprisoned. I need you to help us. I really do. Jennifer Radabau's Prison Fellowship says the impact of children, of the gifts that we give to these kids, whether we can send them to camp or send them a care package if the camp is closed, is life-changing.
Getting to see the kids is so encouraging. God is at work. Their little hearts are open and they need hope. And I think that's what I've heard in every story that the kids have shared, is that there is hope, and that's in Christ. So it's life-changing.
Life-changing, but it requires $200 per kid. That's all. Prison Fellowship runs an amazingly lean organization. So if you will join the Fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I in supporting children, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them, $200 per kid. If the camp's open, and we pray they will, we'll send them to camp. If not, we're going to send them help. Food, sporting equipment, Bible, counseling. We'll go to them. Normally we try and get them out of the city or out of wherever they are and to the camp. But if the camps can't open, we're going to send them the box. $200 per person. The Angel Tree banner is at hughhewitt.com. Please go there. Please go there or call 888-206-2764. 888-206-2764. Time for a relief factor. I used up my last one yesterday. I love doing this on Univision so you can see. Most beautifully designed. I mean, what's one inside of relief factor that matters, but look at how easy that opens. Number one, you open the bag that easily. Number two, when the bag opens that easily, you know, I'm Mr. Coordination. Then you get the packet of the 4 supplements out. Then you open the packet. See how easy that opens? Shouldn't everything open that easily that isn't dangerous to children? Yes. There's Icarian, curcumin, resveratrol, and omega. And here's my lukewarm coffee. Stone cold coffee. And down it goes, and I'm ready for another day. ReliefFactor.com is in me and working. I take it every single day. And you should be too. Tens of thousands of people start their day with ReliefFactor.com. I hope you're among them. Coming back from Israel with Dr. Michael Oren. They have a government. They have a government. They have a government in Israel. Stay tuned. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, joined by Dr. Michael Oren, former Israeli ambassador to the United States. Israel has a new government. It has been sworn in. Michael Pompeo, the United States Secretary of State, jetted over there for 12 hours yesterday, jetted back. Took 24 hours to come and go, but he stayed 12 hours. Dr. Oren, good morning. How are you?
I'm fine, Hugh. Thank you.
What should we know about this new government?
That it is the largest government in Israel's history, 36 ministers, 16 deputy ministers. It is completely sui generis. It will have basically two prime ministers, one acting prime minister at a time. They will switch after a year and a half, 18 months. The foreign ministers will switch. A number of other ministries will switch. It's never been seen before in Israel's history, and most Israelis are skeptical about its longevity.
What about the annexation of territory in Judea and Samaria? Is that going to happen?
I don't know if it's going to happen the way it was promised. I get the sense that Secretary of State Pompeo was in Israel yesterday to put a bit of the brakes on the whole thing. I think the administration has first and foremost the Trump peace plan in mind. And in order for that Trump peace plan to work, you have to have the Gulf Arabs, particularly the Saudis, on board. I think the fear in Washington is that a quick annexation will drive the Saudis and the Emiratis away. So it has to be coordinated. I think the annexation is a good pressure tool. You know, one of the cardinal differences between President Trump's diplomacy and that of every president before him was if in the past the Palestinians left the table and got rewarded, under the Trump administration, the Palestinians leave the table and they get punished, and then punished again and again. Trump closed the Palestinian embassy in Jerusalem. He cut off aid to UNRWA. He recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital, moved the American embassy there. All those he saw as punishment for the Palestinians not coming to the table. Now he's saying if you don't come to the table, Israel's going to annex 30% of the West Bank. But if you come to the table, I'll put the brakes on it. And I think that you've got to sort of like wield the stick without actually smacking the Palestinians yet right now. I think the Secretary of State and the administration to give the Palestinians one last chance to come to the table.
Now, Michael Oren, probably because I finished watching the third season of Fauda this week in my quarantine, I look at Gaza and I say to myself, what is the solution when 97% of the aquifer cannot be drunk? What is the solution when it's 50% unemployment? I asked Richard Haas, and he said, look, there is no solution. What is the Gaza policy? It's run by terrorists. It is a complete catastrophe. It's a humanitarian fiasco. What do you do?
Well, I say this without pride. I was in charge of the Gaza situation for about a year and a half for the government, so I know it very intimately, and I don't wish it on anybody else. It begins with the fact that you have Hamas there, and Hamas actually wants a humanitarian disaster. I know that's hard for a Western or American mind to wrap itself around, but they want to be able to say to the world, Hamas, look how much the Israelis are causing us to suffer. But they don't want it to be too much of a humanitarian problem. So, but who provides that? Abu Mazen. Abu Mazen, the head of the Palestinian Authority, is willing to fight Hamas to the last Israeli. He wants Hamas to open a war against Israel because it'll be a humanitarian disaster. But Israel will come and eliminate Hamas, and then the Palestinian Authority can march back in. And then you have the Iranians, believe it or not. And the Iranians are willing to fight Israel to the last Palestinian. So they're going to get organizations like Islamic Jihad to fire rockets into Israel. Israel will fire rockets back. It'll escalate into a war, and it'll make the Israelis bog down in a terrible war in Gaza while the Iranians complete their nuclear program. You following all this?
Yeah.
This is Gaza.
The
solution of it begins with getting rid of Hamas. Nothing can happen as long as Hamas is there. It's a terrorist entity. It's like saying, what's the solution to the ISIS caliphate? The solution to the ISIS caliphate was getting rid of ISIS.
Is the area livable if it were governed by responsible people?
Well, when 8,000 Israeli settlers lived there in 21 settlements, they ran deluxe shorefront communities with hotels. They grew almost all of Israel's organic vegetables. They left greenhouses. They were purchased by Jewish philanthropists, mostly American Jewish philanthropists, and left the Palestinians when Israel withdrew in 2005, and the Palestinians dismantled them all and sold them all for parts. So the area, yes, could be a Riviera. It really could be.
How endemic is the virus in Gaza?
Not very. Nobody really knows for certain. But the Hamas actually, when it shows what it really wants to clamp down, it can clamp down, and it clamp down on social distancing and mask wearing. When it behooves Hamas to say, "Oh, we have no control over it," say for Islamic Jihad fires a rocket at us, they do that. But when they want to clamp down, they can.
All right, Michael Oren, quick exit question of the new government, the 36 and the 18. Who are the superstars that we don't know the names of in the United States, but we will in 10 years?
Well, you probably will know Nir Barkat, the former mayor of Jerusalem, a very capable person. I served with him in Lebanon back in the 80s. We go way back. He's a little bit of a Dorian Gray. He doesn't seem to get old. Very competent man from high tech. Many other members of the Blue and White, I think, are also prodigious.
Michael Oren, always a pleasure to get the update. We'll continue to talk once a week. Fascinating stuff going on in Israel as it got a new government finally, thank goodness. Now maybe we can get some progress in the United States towards the government of law. Are you listening, Judge Sullivan? The rule of law matters. We'll be right back. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show. Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. It's Hugh Hewitt on May 14th, 2020, in the year of the plague. 84,765 Americans have died as a result of the virus, and I update the numbers every morning for you. I do want to make sure you understand the CDC numbers on the age. Before I go to my guest, I just want people to understand that in all of America, only 459 people under the age of 35 have died. Another 973 have died who were between the ages of 35 and 45. So about 1,500 people under the age of 45. Everybody else in that 84,000 number is above the age of 45. I think public policy is eventually going to have to get to that. I now am joined by Lieutenant General David Deptula, Dean of the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies. Lieutenant General Deptula, welcome back. Good to talk to you. Before I turn to the military question, I'm just curious what you think as a public policy guy and as a military manager, that number about age tells us about managing this virus.
Well, Hugh, I think it's extremely insightful in the context of, let me start with the fact that the measures that were taken in terms of self-quarantine, if you will, were appropriate when we didn't know a whole lot about COVID-19. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't adapt as we garner more and more information. The statistic that you indicate is an illustrative one, and one that indicates that perhaps the initial steps can be adjusted and should be adjusted to accommodate for the reality of the age groups that COVID-19 actually affects. Put in more plain language, it's time for kids to go back to school, and we need to take a much more adjusted, targeted, focused, and intelligent approach toward a response to COVID-19.
You know, one of the things I think about, for example, I think you're an Air Force Academy grad, right, General?
No, actually, I went to Mr. Jefferson's University, the University
of
did
Virginia.
You?
Oh, so you didn't have any college sports. That's too bad.
Well, our football team back in the early 70s was entertainment. We all went to watch the band. But UVA's done quite well for themselves in the sports world now.
My friend Fred Barnes goes down and watch every Cavalier basketball game. But it would mean, for example, the Air Force Academy, when they have the plebes come, or the midshipmen for plebe summer at the Naval Academy or the West Point Cadets,
right.
They could all come and do their summer, I think, in relative safety. I think that if universities adjust to the profile of who is dealing with whom and make age discrimination a feature, not a bug, for a period of time, we'd increase the safety profile and reopen up American higher education.
Well, I think that's just what the Air Force Academy is planning on doing. They're planning on bringing the next entering class in here in the not-too-distant future. But you raise an excellent point. We've got to, with the new information and data, we now have to start to adjust some of the very dramatic measures that were taken initially.
Yeah, a fighter pilot is someone who absorbs a lot of information and adjusts where they're going as a result of that. The mission changes. Now, I want to ask you specifically about an air war that is going on in the skies of Syria that I've been following. It's not a big headline maker, even though it's a life or death breaker for a lot of people in these planes that the IDF is sending over there. What is the Israeli Air Force attempting to accomplish, General, with F-15s? And can you actually degrade the Iranian missile capacity via the air with limited strikes like this?
Well, sure you can. I mean, the Israeli Air Force has been doing an excellent job. And as you mentioned, it is an air operation that's been conducted quietly, behind the scenes, if you will, except for those who are trying to import Iranian missiles into the hands of the Hezbollah and the actors who would put Israel at risk. And when I say, yeah, of course they have, is the Israelis have an excellent intelligence network. They know when the Iranians are continuing to move missiles into Syria and Lebanon, And so they interdict those movements with selective airstrikes from their very capable Air Force.
Now, Syria is a pretty big place, right? It's not a small little country, and so there are a lot of places where Hezbollah or Iran could be. It's about 1/50th the size of the United States, so it's not huge, but it's still.
Not New Jersey, if you put it in context, about the size of New Jersey.
So how do you figure out, I know we have targeteers in the United States, and we have a vast collection capacity and satellites and all that, and I assume Israel's got the same thing, but it's awfully hard to find factories underground, isn't it?
No, not really, because what you do is you look for indicators. You don't have to necessarily... and it's those, let me do it this way, there are indicators that allow one to draw conclusions in terms of where missiles, for example, are being stored. So using those indicators, the Israeli Air Force identifies with a high degree of probability a particular location or site where missiles might be stored, and then they go in and find elements, generally human sources, that can positively verify what's going on before they make a decision to strike or not.
And do they have enough capacity to actually stop a country as intent on malevolence as Iran from standing up a missile capacity without killing lots of civilians? Because we know what Hezbollah does. They hide them in basements.
Yeah, the Israelis have made it quite clear that if in the event Hezbollah and the Iranians who are behind them initiate attack against Israel, that the missile locations will be targeted. That is something that's extraordinarily important that you raise, is that just because missiles are hidden in a location that has civilians doesn't protect those missiles from being struck. It is the entity that is putting civilians at risk that are liable for their well-being, that being Hezbollah. So just because they are going to hide them there doesn't mean that they're invulnerable to attack, nor are they unstrikable in accordance with the laws of international armed conflict. Israel would be fully justified and supported by the laws of international armed conflict to attack those missiles wherever they're located.
All right, General, I want to go halfway around the world and ask you a question I asked Admiral Stavridis on Monday, and which I'll be asking Mike Gallagher in 2 seconds. We know we are in a quiet Cold War with China. Taiwan is our ally in a way that it hadn't been for 50 years. Should we sell them F-35s?
To Taiwan?
Yeah.
I kind of chuckle because I've talked about this for many, many years. It would be strategically dislocating to the Chinese, particularly the B variant. That's the vertical takeoff and landing variant of the F-35, because it's one thing to be able to, with a vast number of missiles that the Chinese have, to hit runways, but you can't affect all the different takeoff locations or landing locations if you have a vertical takeoff aircraft like the F-35B. So it's certainly something that the United States should consider as one of the elements in its effort or strategy to deal with China. And it's one that needs to be considered and entertained. And the mainland Chinese People's Republic of China needs to think about the consequences of their actions that might cause the United States to take such action. But
now the CCP
affect their ability to continue to dominate the region.
Yeah, we got 1 minute, General. We are at the lowest ebb of relations with the CCP in 50 years. So is it a good time to sell F-35s or the worst time to sell F-35s at a moment like this?
Well, what I was trying to allude to is it is an element that needs to be brought into the discussion space as a piece of our not negotiations, but dealing with China. I think one of the pieces that people need to understand is that although it's not as easily observed or understood as a physical warfare The effects of the information warfare campaign that the Chinese are executing are equally devastating. So the United States has got to close this gap in our counter-information warfare campaigns, and using the F-35 as an element of that campaign is certainly something that needs to be incorporated.
General Deptula, always good talking to you. Thank you, General. Follow him on Twitter at Deptula_Dave. And I'll be right back. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by No Safe Spaces.
We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and women created by you know the thing.
Welcome back, America. That's Joe Biden. I play it for you from Monday because of the New York Post cover today, and this is truly a memorable New York Post cover. Biden unmasked with a picture of a vacant stare, Joe Biden. Biden unmasked, a header above the head. What did Joe know and when did he forget it? Below the header. Despite denials, Veep knew of Flynn witch hunt. What did Joe know and when did he forget it? Can we hear Joe on the Declaration of Independence again, please? Cut number 16.
We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and women created by you know the thing.
I just think that's amazing. Okay, what are we talking about? The thing is the Declaration of Independence, and the thing is that we have certain inalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And by the way, that is the apple of gold surrounded by the frame of silver. The frame of silver is the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and the Bill of Rights guarantees why we ought not to be subject to searches and seizures without a justification. And we ought not to be subject to leaking of our unmasked conversations. And we ought not to have the FBI abusing the rights of individuals, even if they hate them, in the way that James Comey hated Lieutenant General Flynn. Senator Josh Hawley, former Supreme Court clerk to Chief Justice John Roberts, author of a book on Teddy Roosevelt, senator from Missouri, former Attorney General of Missouri, was on the Mark Cox radio show yesterday, and he characterized the FBI abuse of power this way. Cut number 6.
Yeah, I frankly don't understand the stalling here by the court, which is a little unprecedented to go out and to seek amicus briefs when you've got the Justice Department's the prosecutor here. I mean, we don't have private party prosecution in the United States. Prosecution's got to be done by elected officials. There's a reason for that. It's so that we can hold them accountable. So yes. I don't love what the court is doing here, going out and asking opinions of third parties about whether or not somebody ought to be prosecuted. You've got the prosecutor, the Department of Justice, saying there was no basis for this. You had an independent review done within the Department of Justice that found that the guy was improperly prosecuted. So that ought to be the end of it. I think it's pretty dangerous to go out and to ask other people, do you think he ought to be prosecuted? What's going to happen? Is the judge going to order somebody else to prosecute?
No, over and again. Josh Hawley is being reserved here. It is an outrage what Judge Sullivan is doing. It is a precedent without precedent. It is a terrible, terrible attack on the rule of law. And there ought to be an interlocutory appeal to the D.C. Circuit. Judge Sullivan should be rebuked, remanded, maybe removed from the bar. Honestly, I've never seen anything like this, where a judge invites the public, mob. Bring the mob in. Let's see what the mob says about prosecuting somebody. Guilty, guilty. Give us Barabbas. Honestly, General Flynn did some bad things. Media Matters will go take that line out of context and they'll not get my sarcasm. But look, I am talking about mob justice. Send in your papers about whether he should be prosecuted. Let's have a vote. Let's have an online poll about whether someone should go to jail. Honest to goodness, where's the ACLU? Let me check the markets. Brought to you by AndrewandTodd.com. One of the businesses untouched, actually flourishing in America, is the mortgage industry. And AndrewandTodd.com are with Sierra Pacific Mortgage, and they're the best mortgage lenders in America. They lend you the money. They actually write you the check. They stroke you the check at closing. They take the paper on your house. They refinance. They help you buy. They get it done. Soup to nuts. AndrewandTodd.com. Call them at 888-888-1172. The 10-year Treasury is at 0.65%. Wow. The lowest interest rates in the history of low interest rates right now. So you can save money, and most Americans need to do that right now in these economic crisis times. Do it by refinancing. Don't clog up the system if you just did it last month and you want to save $50 a month. Please, let people who can save $500 to $1,000 a month get through. AndrewandTodd.com. Fill out a few questions. I'll be back to you. Call 888-888-1172. The head of the Fed talked yesterday and markets collapsed. Dow went down 516 points, NASDAQ 139, the S&P 50. Overseas, everything is just red. Because everything's red, I'm kind of an optimist today. because the American markets usually rebound before the foreign ones. But that 10-year Treasury at 0.65. Call Andrew and Todd.com today, 888-888-1172. Come right back. Congressman Gallagher is next.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you by Prison Fellowship's Angel Tree Summer Camps. Click on the banner at HughHewitt.com.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. I've got sad news for Indians fans and Tigers fans and Cubs fans and White Sox fans. They're thinking about realigning baseball for a short season, and they're going to combine the Central Division of the American League and the Central Division of the National League. That means we have to play the Brewers, and nobody wants to play the Brewers. I mean, nobody. I don't even know who's on the Brewers. I was unaware they were still an organized team. I'm joined now by Representative Mike Gallagher, who is from Wisconsin. Maybe he knows something about the Brewers. Did you see the story that they're thinking about a 9-team division because nobody wants to play the Brewers, Congressman?
Well, I did not see the story, but I assume no one wants to play the Brewers because we're too good. Let us also not forget the scandal brewing where this is all an attempt to deny the Milwaukee Bucks a championship that they were on a clear path to winning this season in the NBA. So a lot of scandals brewing, Hugh, as you well know.
A lot of people have already put the NBA to bed, and nobody's moaning it being gone. They're worried about baseball getting started, but I just worry nobody wants to play the Brewers. It's sad. Congressman, I got to ask you a couple of important questions. First of all, you're not a lawyer, nor did you stay at a Holiday Inn. But I have been talking about the fact I am outraged by what Judge Sullivan has done. It is an attack on the rule of law. It is a genuine disservice to every defendant, to the Bill of Rights, to everything we know about Article 2 and Article 3. What do you think about this story?
Well, it seems odd to effectively crowdsource your decision relating to sentencing. And quite honestly, Hugh, I don't know what the precedent for that is. And it's just another element of an increasingly bizarre story as it relates to General Flynn, and one that I think should trouble everybody, regardless of their party affiliation. I should admit my bias. I worked for General Flynn in the reserves. I was actually with him in Ripon, Wisconsin, the week before all this started in late November. I always knew him to be a dedicated public servant. But this broader story, where we have a minimum of 50 unmaskings from 39 different officials between the end of November and mid-December, seems, at the very least, to be a clear abuse of power, especially since that list includes Vice President Biden. And since some of the requests came before Flynn's meeting with Kislyak, which aroused a lot of suspicion. So we now have evidence of an abuse of power, and of course we know that this led to the commission of a felony. The leak of those transcripts of those calls was a felony, the leak to the Washington Post. And so I think we should all, regardless of our partisan affiliation, hope that Durham gets to the bottom of that felony and holds the felon accountable, especially.
No, I want to cover a couple of things. First of all, I don't know if you've seen the New York Post front page today. It's one of the more brutal ones I've ever seen. Biden unmasked, top head. What did Joe know and when did he forget it? Bottom head, despite denials, Veep knew of Flynn witch hunt. This is going to be the popular understanding of Biden's role in this, but far more important is the fact that 39 different people requested the unmasking of Michael Flynn. Now, you were a former Marine intelligence officer. You're still a Marine, but you used to be in the intel business. I now see the anti-Trump media coming up with this line. I quote Julia Pace. I don't know if she's anti-Trump, but I see this everywhere in the anti-Trump media. Fun fact about unmasking, it's very common. How common, you ask? There were 9,529 unmasking requests in 2017, 16,721 in 2018, and 10,012 last year. That's actually irrelevant, Mike Gallagher. What is relevant is how many were there between the election of 2008 and the inauguration of Barack Obama. That's the data set that is relevant.
Well, that's precisely right, because what we have here at stake is the peaceful transfer of power, which is as close to sacred as any process in our republic, and the timing is incredibly suspicious. I also wonder if that broader universe of unmaskings does include people as high up as the vice president, or involve discussions that we know were had in the Oval Office with the president himself. So I don't think it's fair to include this particular case where you have an incoming national security advisor for the elected incoming administration unmasked by 39 officials at the highest levels of our government. The final point I make here is, if unmasking is just a routine thing that we do, then why do we have such important rules or taboos against it if it's just a routine thing that happens every single day in the intelligence community. So I don't agree with the premise of that counter argument, and I would agree with your assertion that this is just a fundamentally different category and type of case.
Oh, it's so obvious to me what's going on here is they're kicking up dirt. They're trying to avoid the implication, which is it is what I call Obamagate. That people say, what does that mean? To me, it means the intentional interference with the peaceful transfer of power, cooperative and seamless, as it has been since 1861, when we had, unfortunately, a civil war. It's never happened. We've never had this, Mike Gallagher, and rule of law conservatives and liberals should all be aghast at what went on here.
Well, and the FBI has said, correct me if I'm wrong, Hugh, that it was a meeting in late December that Flynn had, or a conversation he had, that sparked a lot of their investigation interest. But we now know that the request for unmasking happened nearly a month earlier. So if anyone has a legitimate defense for why they requested the unmasking, now would be the time for them to tell Durham, because the timing does not seem to add up. I do have some confidence, though, based on what I know about Durham, that he will get to the bottom of this. I think it's going to be very hard to determine who exactly was the leaker, just given the fact that there were 39 people involved. And that may indeed be the intent here. And the truth would be to hide the origin of it with so many people involved. But I do have confidence in Durham's ability to get to the bottom of this.
Sure it is. If you want to hide the fact that you're leaking classified information, what you want to do is trigger a whole dozens of requests for the information that you're about to leak, so that you cannot trace the leak, right? That's what you did. This is what this is. They've got 39 body doubles of Saddam Hussein running around Iraq, so we can't figure out who he is or where he is. It's just, it's so obvious what was done here. What do you make of Susan Rice's memo to the file on the day of the inauguration? Nothing to see here, not to worry, everything we were told to do, everything by the book. What does that smell like to you?
It smells like an admission of guilt against interest. It's just such a bizarre document. I mean, why write it unless you were nervous about covering your tracks? So I do think I see it. And again, I don't have evidence for this. So, I mean, caveat lector, but I view this as part of the broader smokescreen that you were talking about, and a way of covering the fact that they were messing with the peaceful transfer of power.
And so I want to get to my other key question. Do you have any indication from within the House of Representatives that Adam Schiff is at all embarrassed by what has come out, which is obvious in its implication for his veracity, which is it doesn't exist?
No, I don't, because the man is, quite simply put, shameless. I don't think he's cowed in any sense by the evidence that he was making a lot of this up, that he was abusing his position as chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. Remember that in something very historic, all the Republicans on the committee called for his resignation on a committee that used to be the most bipartisan committee in Congress. And so, but despite that, I don't have any sense that he feels one iota of contrition. And that's unfortunate, because it's resulted in the politicization of the intelligence community and the breakdown in a very productive oversight relationship, and really a breakdown in trust, not only between the branches, but between the American people and Congress.
Yeah, it's a very low point. I didn't think any news could break through the pandemic, but this has, because it's such a potent scandal. Now, I've asked Admiral Stavridis and General Deptula. I want to ask you, Congressman Gallagher, you're on Armed Services. Should we be selling F-35s to Taiwan?
Well, the Trump administration deserves credit for selling 66 F-16s to Taiwan. The concern is that the technology on the F-35 Bravos in this case is just too sensitive, and there's too much leakage potentially to the mainland. So an interim step we could consider is selling F-18s, which, unlike the F-16s, can talk to the Navy and the Marine Corps assets, which would be Taiwan's most logical partner. The holy grail in my mind would actually be to figure out a way to host INF non-compliant missile systems in Taiwan, which would allow us to target the PLA Navy on the cheap, far cheaper than we would do it with aircraft. So that's something we should explore at a broader level.
Would you expand on that for the Bucks fans and the Steelers fans out there, what you just said?
Bucks fans are super into arms control, so they understand. But we are no longer bound by the INF treaty, which prohibited the use of ground launch intermediate range missiles with a range between 500 to 5,500 kilometers. So we can basically put missile systems in Indo-PACOM that allow us to do to the PLA Navy what they're doing to our Navy, which is target them very cheaply. This is a critical component of the Marine Corps Commandant's strategy for modernizing the Marine Corps. And the most difficult aspect of it is going to be convincing our allies in the region, whether it's Japan or Taiwan or Australia, to host some of these missile systems, because the Chinese Communist Party will not like that. But that is evidence that we're onto something. I just would say at a broader level, Hugh, I wrote an op-ed for the National Review 3 days ago talking about the need to stand with Taiwan. This is a critical moment for doing that because its very existence is a repudiation of the Chinese Communist Party. We have an incredible ally in Taiwan. I think we need to clarify our policy of strategic ambiguity. We need to support Taiwan's observer status in the World Health Organization as well as other international organizations. And I think there's an opportunity here for Secretary Pompeo and others to visit Taipei to give an address at, something like the American Institute in Taiwan, just talking about Taiwan's exceptional response to coronavirus in contrast to the lies of the Chinese Communist Party.
Well, Foreign Minister Wu is a great guest. He should be everywhere. It's a question for next week whether or not provocative actions at the low point of American-Chinese relations or at the high point are more provocative. I think they're right now necessary, but we'll continue. I do have to point out, you did it again, Congressman. You said the Indo-PACOM Theater, and we got Pirates fans out there like Carl who's wondering what stadium is that? Who got the naming rights for Indo-PACOM? It's one of those things that you've just got to stop doing. You cannot talk that way to my Pittsburgh audience.
Okay. Well, everything outside of Wisconsin is strategic depth.
Okay. Okay. Good to talk to you, Congressman. Don't go anywhere, America. I'm coming right back with Jim Talent. Going to ask him the same question about Taiwan. But I want to remind you, ReliefFactor.com. I should have found out from Congressman Gallagher how many miles he's putting in. Because I did 250s. This is going to be a 25. You can't do 50-mile weeks after week after week after week. You just got to slow down sometimes and let the body recover. But ReliefFactor.com helps you do that. I carry curcumin, resveratrol, and omega. I take my pack in Star and remind you in hours 2 and 3. So before you leave the house, you put yourself on the path to feeling better, supporting the temporary relief of the minor aches and pains that come with aging and exercise. I'm really hoping that all of you, even if you missed the first 8 weeks of the shutdown, we got another 16 weeks of this, 24 weeks of this social distancing where you're not going to go to the gym, so you're going to have to do different things. You're not going to have your equipment. You're not going to have your excuses. Walk, run, trundle, jog, get outside. My retired toxicologist told me today one of the healthiest things people can do going forward in the summer is to be outside. Not close to people, but to be outside. And that means moving around. So get out and do it. Get out and do it for a long time in the sunshine and use ReliefFactor.com to get it done. Coming right back with Jim Talent, America. Don't go anywhere. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show.
This portion of the Hugh Hewitt Show has been brought to you by MyPillow. Call 800-951-5493 or go to MyPillow.com and be sure to use a promo code HUGH.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt, joined by former United States Senator Jim Talon from Missouri, one of the actual experts on pandemic planning. He and former Democratic Senator Bob Graham did a lot of the Senate's investigation of pandemics in the years past. Senator Talon, there is emerging a data point, which I want to get your reaction to. Through May 13th, according to the Centers for Disease Control, there have been a total of 459 deaths attributed to the virus with people under the age of 35, a total of 459. Another 973 died because of the virus who were between ages 35 and 45. So of all of the deaths in America, less than 1,500 have occurred under the age of 45 since the CDC started keeping count of this. Should that impact public policy, and if so, how?
Yeah, I think clearly what it points towards you is that as we move forward, we focus on protecting the vulnerable populations, which is basically the elderly and the frail, and that we not only permit others to begin circulating, but we encourage them to do it in a prudent fashion, because the downside, the negative consequences of everybody being shut down is obviously great, and it's cascading. In other words, it's going to grow geometrically. So, yeah, I think it clearly points to that. And I would not wait until we feel absolutely secure we can test everybody at every time, regardless, because I just don't think that regime is ever going to work, as well as on paper the public health experts would like it to work.
Now, if I'm 64 years old, if someone tells me that a restaurant is being staffed and cooked and served by people under the age of 45, I'm likelier to go into it than if I'm going to go into the cafeteria at the retirement home, right? Doesn't
right.
that this is the illustration of what I'm trying. We should be encouraging certain behaviors in the marketplace to lower risk profiles for everybody.
Right, exactly. And that will also help develop natural immunity in the population, which will cut off the vectors of transmission for the disease. And you don't have to have, 50% of the public with antibodies to achieve that. I mean, the more you get, it's our offensive weapon against the disease is the natural immunity people develop after they get it and they recover from it. Everything points to that. We'll be able to focus better on the areas that really are vulnerable, like care homes, nursing homes, for example, if we do that. I think that's where they're headed, you in most states. I think they're going to get there. My concern is the governors who are saying, again, we have to have this testing regime fully developed. By all means, get the tests out there as quickly as we can. We've developed a lot of capability, but I would not wait that long. How many people are not getting testing that they need because of this shutdown?
Oh my God, the medical consequences of the shutdown, non-COVID related in terms of depression, addiction, deaths are extraordinary. Jim Talon, let me close by asking you about this. When we've got people like Barstool Sports, I'm sure you're not affiliated with it. Oh, you know Barstool. The founder went on a rant last night. He said, when did we change the goal from flattening the curve to finding a cure?
Right.
Because it seems to him like they've changed the goalpost. Have we changed the goalpost?
I think they've evolved, and that's okay up to a point. But he points out something which pandemic experts have been telling me for the last 12 years. I mean, they never loved this idea of general quarantines. One of the reasons is that after a while, people won't obey them, and you risk ending up with the worst of all possible worlds, where people are out circulating so that you're not restricting. In other words, you're not restricting the spread of the disease, but the restraints are in place so that you suffer the economic and other public health damages of it. And we're going to get there if we don't open up pretty quickly. But again, it's a little slower than I would like.
You know what's holding us back, Senator, is that when a tragic death occurs of a minor or a child, even though it is one among 80,000, the media will go unfocus on that, and they will extract a political price on whoever allowed the opening. That because of the way we have concentrated media on tragedy and have no way to gauge proportionality, that's what's going to happen. That's what's holding back decision makers. Last minute to you.
Yeah, I think that's right. Some of this is politics, and I think, frankly, boneheaded politics. I think it's It's very short-sighted. Some of it is, to be fair to the media, is they are grappling with getting a framework for understanding pandemics. Everybody's going through different stages of trying to understand something that, 3 or 4 months ago, nobody was familiar with at all, right? So I think it's both of that happening, but yes, they need to put this whole thing in context. I feel kind of strange because after 10 years, waving the flag, trying to get people to pay attention to the danger of a pandemic. Now I'm trying to get people to just be calm, carry on, okay? And there's a lot about what's developed in the last couple of months that means this is not anywhere near as bad as it could have been from a health standpoint. It's very, very bad. Please don't let anybody say it's, but it's not as bad as it could have been. And now I think we need to start going out and confronting the disease.
Agreed. Jim Talent, always reassuring to talk to you. Thank you, my friend. Follow him on Twitter at Jim Talent. You get the most level-headed, the most serious conversations when you talk to Jim Talent about the pandemic. Coming right back, 2 senators and Chuck Todd, Senator Thom Tillis, Senator John Thune, Chuck Todd to Meet the Press. Stay with me, America. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show brought to you by Sierra Pacific Mortgage. For more info, call 888-888-1172.
Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Thank you for listening, whether you're on one of my 400 affiliates or anywhere across the world, watching on YouTube or at HughHewitt.com. Welcome. Coming up later in the hour, Senator John Thune will join me, second ranking the whip in the Republican Senate caucus, and Senator Thom Tillis in a tough race for re-election in North Carolina. But I begin, as I do most Thursdays when we are lucky, with Chuck Todd, because if it's Thursday, it's Chuck Todd. If it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press. But if it's Thursday, it's Chuck Todd. Good morning, Chuck. Everyone on Team Todd, healthy, good, doing well?
You know, everybody except for one of my dogs, and I say this with love. She's been terrific, but she's very and I was reading up on this, that some dogs are having their own version of quarantine fever, and she's just very clingy. It's very interesting. She's uneasy, and they said one of the reasons they think, you know, if you give dogs the run of your house when you're gone for the day, they see that as, you know, they're in charge. And
interesting.
You're not. Yeah, this was one of the things I was reading, and they say this gets dogs more nervous, and she's really worked herself into a bit of a frenzy, but we've been calming her down. But yeah, it's interesting.
The Hewitts growing up, we had a 2-week dog because my daughter was so allergic. So now my son has a dog. I have a grand dog. But I can't go see it because of the social distancing stuff. And if social distancing applies to pets, I did not know that until 2 weeks ago.
Well, because it's tested in cats.
Yep.
A lot of cats have gotten it, by the way.
All right. Let's get to the important stuff. Baseball before politics. I like the approach to the 82-game season, but Terry Pluto, who I consider to be the finest sports writer in America, has said that Major League labor issues may prevent this. What's your understanding of this, Chuck Todd?
Yes. Look, few people know this before. I for a couple of years, I covered the sports business world, helped start a publication called the Sports Business Daily, which some people now know as the Sports Business Journal. Anyway, I was stunned when Manfred came out with a plan and he hadn't dealt with the union. You're just like, look, there's one sports union that matters, as we all know if you're a sports fan. It's that baseball union. It's the strongest of the unions. It just is. And, you know, the football union's the weakest. You could very much roll them over. The basketball union is always split between the haves and the have-nots. But baseball acts as one. I thought Manfred, I was surprised he went out public without the support of the union. It looks like he's trying to jam them. And as you know, once you publicly jam somebody, whether it's a political debate in Congress or a union debate, you're going to get pushback.
Yeah, there is no crying in baseball, and there is no salary cap in baseball. And it is the latter that is going to, I think, screw this up. Now, you do have great connection. Is there a path we got to get baseball back, and it's perfectly doable, except for people like Cookie Carrasco who have leukemia. I mean, it's the right age group. They're healthy athletes. What do you hear?
I just don't know if the players, it's funny. There's a bit of it looks like there's a split between older and younger players, basically players with families and players without families, right? The single players, they're ready to go. The ones with family are a little more nervous. And so you have that. You have coaches that are a little more nervous about it because they're a little bit older, if you will. So there's just, and then the question is, all right, if you're going to test every day, so what do you do? I mean, look, I don't know if you saw Peter King. No, not that Peter King, the sports writer Peter King, but his interview with Fauci. And Fauci goes, so if, his question was, so 4 players on Saturday night test positive. He said, whoa, right there, you may have an outbreak. And somebody put it in a better way in the Times this morning in a column about college football and said, what happens if your left tackle tests positive? And they've been with the offensive line group all week. You have to quarantine your offensive line. You find out Friday night. What do? There goes that game. So it's funny, Hugh. I'm with you from 30,000 feet. And then when people start giving you these hypotheticals, and then you're like, I'm with you. All of a sudden I went, yikes. I don't know what you do. You know what I mean? Like it becomes, you start to see how quickly the hurdles get erected in front of you without much movement. And so it is more complicated than it looks from 30,000.
Agree. I just don't know how we don't get back to letting people under 45 do what they would normally do.
Here's what I would like on the sports world. Go with tournament. Try to do 2 and 3 weeks at a time. I want to also tell you about something. I was speaking with the president of Howard University, and I thought he had a terrific school year calendar idea. And let me walk you through it because I actually think it makes a lot of sense. Essentially, he's a medical doctor, and his first goal is to basically shrink the fall semester. And he's like, look, Howard, it's important we have in-person classes, but he wants to shrink the fall semester. He wants one less month of the flu. So basically, get the students off campus before Thanksgiving. So maybe you come in a little bit early. Maybe that means you start August 15th, right? And then you create a winter. He was calling it a mini-mester, but he may say, you know what? Maybe you do a whole semester. Basically, the school is shut. Campus is shut down to basically Thanksgiving to March 1st. Again, you are missing all the prime months, but you go ahead and have an online semester. Then you come back to campus essentially after your spring break in March, and maybe it goes through June. But when you think about it, it is the most common sense idea of a school calendar that basically you try to mitigate the amount of time you're together in the worst flu month,
and you try and preserve the network effects of being at a college.
Yes, it's Dr. Wayne Frederick of Howard University, and it's among the plans they're talking about locally here in D.C.
That's a good idea.
They're all working together. By the way, they're talking about sharing a quarantine dorm. By the way, because that's the other thing. And he said Howard's probably going to develop their own tests at their own medical school, but basically, testing, tracing, quarantining. Testing, tracing, quarantining. He said the D.C. schools are talking about sharing a quarantine dorm. Now, granted, that's something that bigger urban areas can do, right, where you have multiple universities and you can sort of partner together. It's a little harder for your land grants. But I tell you, you said this on my podcast yesterday. I thought, look, it's as smart of a sort of hybrid that I've heard yet of a school year. And I think you could apply it, frankly, because you can double the amount of time in fall if you had to instead of 2 days a week. Maybe you have classes 4 days a week. And you can come up with similar, the school year isn't as set as we all make it sound to be.
It's a lot smarter than what Cal State is doing everything online. That will fail. People will not pay for that. But this is a hybrid. It might work.
And I'll tell you what the president of Howard said to me. And he said, look, he goes, especially, I was telling, why not invest more in remote? And he says, look, and for him, he's like, for Howard, we're getting a lot of first generation college students. And some of them are in really tough conditions. And we want to get them in a safe or a good learning environment. And he says it's really important we have opportunities for them to come on campus. And I tell you, he made a very passionate case on those grounds of why it's so important to have these students on campus if you want to get rid of generational inequality.
You do your own programming. I think you could do an entire Meet the Press on what do colleges do, because higher education is on the cliff.
I don't disagree.
Okay, very quickly, I got to ask you.
I'm a believer, Hugh, really quick. I'm a believer that if you solve this campus issue, you solve the entire economic problem. I really believe that.
And if you don't,
the tactics you use for testing and tracing for a college campus allow you to open up any business in America.
My buddy Al Mohler, who runs Southern Baptist Theology, said there is no more anti-social distancing age cohort than the college community. And if you don't solve it, the economy is going to have some secondary or second order effects, which are devastating. Very quickly, we got 2 minutes. Judge Sullivan has outraged me. I have never been this upset about an order because it is the usurpation by Article 3 of Article 2's authority. There is 3.5 precedent in the D.C. Circuit where I clerked. I don't know what you say about this, Chuck, but Judge Sullivan is way out of line.
Here's the thing. I'm not going to sit here and debate the law on that with you or anything like that. Here's what it's clear to me. The legal community is at odds with each other, right? And this was a very divisive move. It was a very polarizing move. And so I don't know about you. I wonder if Barr thought this was a possibility when he did it. And I wonder, I only ask this. It's like, it does sound like the judge basically says he wants to make Trump pardon him. Like, if you want him off, you have to do
yes.
You don't get to use the Justice Department. And you're just like, this just feels like this is part of a larger war, essentially, over the, how do you define what is politicizing of the justice?
That is absolutely accurately described, but it's why it bothers me so much.
I am so upset about our current situation in general, Hugh. I think we're so divided and polarized that I do believe we are making this harder to recover from, the pandemic, the economic realities here. we've got to figure out how to do both here.
If everyone would make every decision,
everybody healthy.
If everyone would make every decision with the unity of the country in mind, we would be a lot better off. I don't think Judge Sullivan has. And that's where I will watch on Sunday on Meet the Press to see what everyone has to say about that, because if it's Sunday, it'll be Meet the Press. Chuck Todd, thank you as always. I'll be right back, America. Stay tuned.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show brought to you by Sierra Pacific Mortgage. For more info, call 888-888-1172.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. I don't think we're going to be able to work out Judge Sullivan's outrageous conduct in the case involving General Flynn. There are just two ways, the right way and the wrong way to view this. People are forgetting civil liberties. They're forgetting Article 3 and Article 2 are different. They are forgetting that this involves due process. They are forgetting everything. General Flynn was the subject of a conversation the president just had with Maria Bartiromo on Fox News, on Fox Business. And, of course, he ripped what's going on, and he's right to do so. Let me check the markets if I can. Pre-market report brought to you by Business Story of the Day, brought to you by AndrewandTodd.com. AndrewandTodd.com are with Sierra Pacific Mortgage. 888-1172. 888-1172. You need to get a house. You need to buy a house. You need to refinance a house. That's where you go. AndrewandTodd.com. Answer a couple of questions online or call them at 888-1172. I've known Andrew for 25 years. I've known Todd for 8 now. I've been doing the math and catching up. I've been doing this spot for so long. I've forgotten. And nobody's mad at him, ever. I never get a complaint. They've been like sponsors on the show for 7 years. Why? Because they're ethical, wonderful human beings, and they take care of you, and you can trust them. 888-1172, especially if you're a senior citizen at the age of 62 or older, and you want to investigate seriously a reverse mortgage, which gets cash out of your house and you never have to make another mortgage payment. And you do have to pay your taxes in your homeowner association, but never make another mortgage payment and get some cash to make life livable. AndrewandTodd.com. The big story is what Jay Powell yesterday, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, said. He said additional fiscal stimulus is going to be worth it. And I will be talking with John Thune after the break about whether or not trillions more are coming. That is huge. Overnight, the markets overseas are not happy, and indeed in England and Germany, where markets are open right now, the English market is down 3%. The German market is down 2.71%. Gold is at 17.19, but the good news, oil is up to 26. That's good, and I think. I don't like to predict what's going to happen in the American market, but when everything is red abroad, I usually think it's going to be green in the United States. We lead, we don't follow, typically. Let me also ask you to follow me to HughHewitt.com and to the Angel Tree banner. That's run by Prison Fellowship, and I speak now on behalf of thousands of kids who need your help. They have mom or dad or both parents in prison. They're 6, they're 7, they're 8, they're 9, they're 10. And they don't ever go anywhere with mom or dad because mom and dad is locked up. And so every summer, Prison Fellowship sends those kids to Angel Tree Camp. They're going to do as many of those as they can this summer. If the camps can open, there's some good news in that. They're beginning to think maybe, yeah. But if they can't send them to camp, they're going to send them a box of blessings. Food, sports equipment, the stuff that you need, a note from mom or dad, a reach out from a Prison Fellowship volunteer, relationship, comfort, community. But it costs $200 a kid. And would you sponsor one child or 2 or 3 or 4? Fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I are in for 5 kids. We would encourage you, please, whether it's $20 or $200 or $2,000, whatever you can do, you go over to HughHewitt.com and you will find there the Angel Tree banner. Not quite at the top, almost at the top. I got to play for you again, Joe Biden. Yes, this is from a Texas rally on March the 3rd. I hadn't heard it until yesterday. Cut number 16.
We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and women created by you know the thing.
The reason I play that from so long ago is the New York Post article this morning. Joe Biden was involved in the illegal unmasking of Michael Flynn. I say illegal because you have to have a justification for it, and there's absolutely no justification for it when Joe Biden asked it 2 days before he left office. There is no justification for that. And so I view that as a breach of the spirit, if not the letter of the law on unmasking. And the New York Post headline is, what did Joe know and when did he forget it? All right, and so everybody knows what we're referring to is that Joe has not lost a step, he's lost a lap. And it's becoming painfully obvious, but I don't know if he can remember why he requested General Flynn. He botched it in the conversation yesterday. But Judge Sullivan, I hope you are listening. What you are doing is outrageous, a great scar upon the Constitution, to the shame of the courts, and I hope the D.C. Circuit gets an interlocutory appeal and rebukes you absolutely, positively, for all time. What you are doing is horrific. in terms of the due process rights of an individual American before your court. You, sir, are not a prosecutor. You're the judge. I'll be right back on the Hugh Hewitt Show. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Thank you for listening to the program this morning. Joined now by United States Senator John Thune from the great state of South Dakota. He is the GOP whip number 2 in the House, in the Senate Republican caucus. Good morning, Senator Thune. How's everyone on the Thune family side? Everyone healthy?
We are indeed. Thank you, Hugh, and hopefully yours as well.
Yeah, indeed. And I begin by asking you about the pandemic. The statistics that I'm looking at show that of all the tens of thousands of deaths in America, only 1,500, I know that's a large number, but only 1,500 of the tens of thousands have been for people 45 and younger. Does our reopening plan have to start taking account of this demographic reality, Senator?
I think it does. I think that's, it needs to be a factor. And I think the phased approach that the White House has proposed and that many states are implementing and adopting will include those types of considerations. I think that vulnerable people with pre-existing conditions, elderly, nursing homes, people in that age category just have to be more careful. And I think that a lot of as the opening occurs and it starts to ramp up, I think that's something that needs to be a part and factor because, as you point out, that's where the greatest risk is.
Now, yesterday or 2 days ago, Speaker Pelosi put out a silly, absurd bill. I call it cash for cannabis because there's a provision in there that takes care of marijuana dispensaries. It's just not a serious bill. When are we going to get to what Fed Chairman Powell said is a very necessary phase 4, Senator Thune?
Well, I think we will soon enough, Hugh. And this is really true. Even the media has described the House approach as just a grab bag of Democratic priorities, a messaging bill destined to go nowhere in the Senate, that even meeting resistance from some Democrats. That's the way it's been characterized by the press. But clearly nobody is taking it seriously, and it does include a whole bunch of just, sort of over-the-top features like, the fact that it mentions cannabis more times than it mentions jobs. And there's a provision in there, a Democrat priority, repeal the SALT cap, which is a huge tax cut for millionaires, and actually 56% of that benefit goes to the top 1% of people in this country in terms of income. So there's just a lot of really crazy stuff in there. If it's not a Democrat wish list, I don't know what is. What we're working on here in the Senate, obviously, are trying to respond to the real health emergency and economic crisis needs of the American people, and determining, based on what we've done so far, what those needs are. And we will react and respond in a timely way, hopefully in a bipartisan way, to address the ongoing economic hardship that's being felt by businesses across this country, workers across this country, families across this country, but not go down this crazy path chosen by the House Democrats, which, again, is just nothing more, nothing less, and nothing else than a messaging exercise.
The old saying is true. The hedgehog knows one thing, the fox knows many things. Well, dumb foxes are in the middle of the road, and I think that's what the House bill is. It's in the middle of the road. But the hedgehog is the Republican caucus, and the one thing, Larry Kudlow on this show earlier this week, Leader McConnell, I expect you will say the same thing, that is the must-have is liability protection for all Americans from any allegation that they are responsible for the virus. And without that, the country will not recover. It's got to be a blanket, I think almost a non-suit provision for anyone who wants to claim a tort injury in state or federal law against anybody for the virus. I'm not even inclined now to allow reckless disregard claims because they will bankrupt people.
Well, we do need a federal shield, and that is a priority for us. These lawsuits represent a very real and present threat to any kind of economic recovery. And Senate Republicans are going to stand firm and pursue liability protections for healthcare workers, businesses, others on the front line of the response and the reopening phase. And the Democrats, Hugh, of course, always paint this is just protecting big corporations. Not true. I mean, this is doctors, this is hospitals, people making extraordinary efforts to protect patients and healthcare workers, but are living in fear of being sued if a patient were somehow exposed to the disease in the process of receiving care. So you've got nonprofits, you've got hospitals, you've got businesses. You go right down the list. Schools. There's just we can't be going down this path of frivolous lawsuits, driving up the cost of reopening our economy, and potentially prolonging a recession or driving us worse into a depression. We're in the middle of a pandemic. What we don't need is an epidemic of frivolous lawsuits to make it that much harder for us to recover.
There are two sectors that I repeatedly return to, Senator Thune. One is higher education, colleges and universities are on the brink because they're a tuition-dependent, semi-annual infusion of cash that if they don't get it, they collapse. And the second are restaurants. Both of those sectors absolutely need liability protection. I mean, absolute shield. They need the Avengers to surround them. Otherwise, their margins aren't there. And if so, a student becomes sick on campus and sues the private campus or the state university under some exception to sovereign immunity, they're done for. And the restaurant, which is barely going to reopen anyway with margins that are probably set back 5 years, they can't afford even the threat of it. They can't afford to respond to the lawyer's letter.
Right. I mean, and the idea of having to hire lawyers to respond and just the enormous of just dealing with everything that comes with a lawsuit like that, plus not to mention, in many cases, probably these people are not going to be accustomed to this. This adds to anxiety in businesses where the margins are very thin. I mean, restaurants operate on thin margins. They're going to continue to have their restaurants for some time well into the future, probably half full. Hopefully phasing up to better than that. But in the meantime, they're going to be scraping to get by, and they one thing they can't deal with. And colleges are a good example as well. I mean, our state in South Dakota, I've talked to all our college presidents. They're expecting a significant reduction next fall in enrollment, a significant increase in costs associated with having to hire more faculty for smaller classroom sizes. All those sorts of things are going to make it really, really tough for folks operating with thin margins to get by. This would complicate and exacerbate and make it that much harder for them to survive.
Now, Senator, I want to veer off into a couple of conversations with you and then come back to the phase 4. But I have to ask you about Judge Sullivan's just outrageous decision to invite briefing on someone's when the prosecution wants to dismiss a case. He's leaving it open. He's appointed a retired judge to come in. It's extraordinary. It is an assault on civil liberties, the likes of which I haven't seen in a federal court in my 33 years of practice. Can the Senate Judiciary Committee hold an emergency hearing on this? Because it is outrageous.
It is. It is a gross miscarriage of justice. And I'm hoping, and I haven't talked to Senator Graham, who, as you know, chairs the Judiciary Committee, but it certainly seems to be the substance of a hearing to get at what this judge has done. And if you are, you cannot now say that the previous administration wasn't doing everything they possibly could to screw it up for an incoming administration to the point of taking actions that arguably are illegal. And I think, frankly, this needs to be fully investigated and figure out how high up it goes in the administration. We're seeing some of that evidence coming out now. I think there'll be more that will come out, but this was a full-scale, appears to be conspiracy to undermine and try and take down an incoming administration, a new president.
And one side of it is Judge Sullivan, the other is the unmasking. And a reporter asked the president in the Rose Garden the other day, what is Obamagate? And he said everybody knows, and he walked away. I describe it this way. It is the intentional interference with the peaceful, seamless, cooperative transition of power, which is the glory of the American Republic. And that clearly went on between the time of the surprise win of Donald Trump and his swearing in, and these 39 requests for unmasking are unprecedented. Now, we get a lot of dirt being kicked up. Unmaskings happen all the time. I'll bet you there were very few unmaskings of senior incoming Obama officials in between the election of President Obama-elect and his inauguration by George W. Bush administration officials, Senator Thune. I'm not afraid of that data set comparison at all.
I'm not either, and I can't imagine that the Bush administration would go to these lengths, even though they disagreed profoundly with, at that time, incoming President Obama and his agenda. But we've always allowed for, and I think as you described it, and the Wall Street Journal, an editorial page described it, a peaceful transition of power is the hallmark of American democracy. And clearly this was an attempt to try and undermine and cripple the Trump administration as they came on the scene. And that's why it is unprecedented. I don't think, certainly we've heard the end of it. This needs to be something that is carefully reviewed and investigated, and let's find out how far up it goes.
So there's a lot of poison in the system, so I come back to phase 4. I even admit that the states need, for example, some backstop on unemployment claim money that they just don't have. And that's related to the collapse of sales tax revenue, the late payment on property taxes, people fleeing the states, not staying at hotels. They have legitimate needs unrelated to their pension fiascos, et cetera. With all the poison in the system, is there anyone for you and Senator McConnell to sit down with to actually negotiate 3.75, the emergency stuff, the liability shield, and some state aid? Is there anybody over there that you can work with?
Well, I hate to tell you, Hugh, because you want everybody to hope and think the best, and anything that passes the Senate obviously has to be, of course, as you know, bipartisan. But it's really hard to get reasonable people to sit down because they're so held hostage to the House agenda. I mean, Schumer is looking over his shoulder at Pelosi. Pelosi's looking over her shoulder at AOC and the Sanders folks, and they're just being pulled so hard to the left that it's hard to find anything, any Democrat now that you could characterize as moderate or reasonable to negotiate with. So my guess is what happens, at least I hope what happens, is that the White House works with Senate Republicans to put together an agenda that makes sense, that addresses the economic and health emergency needs of the American people, and that we can bring Democrats in to negotiate and to find some common ground. But it gets really hard when you go to that House because right now they're all running for re-election, and the base of their party, the activists, the donors, everybody is part of that socialist wing of the Democratic Party, and it's going to make it very, very hard for us, I think, to get some of these things done. But we're going to do everything we can because we're here to respond to what the American people need, and we're focused. We want to do it in a bipartisan way. We hope there are Democrats who are willing and Democrats who can be reasonable about what needs to be done and get away from this sort of left-wing agenda that is right now captivated all the House Democrats.
Last question, Senator. In California's 25th, which had been won by the Democrats by 7 points, Mike Garcia crushed it. The Republican won by a dozen points, maybe more. Doesn't that send a message to the Democrats that they're a illusory blue wave? They took the mask off, and America does not want left-wing AOC policies?
You would think so. I hope that's the way it's received by the Democrats. That is a very historic election out there. Of course, we had a strong candidate, but you think about flipping a blue seat for the first time in over 20 years. It definitely, I think, should sound an alarm. They should be hearing something on the Democrat side about the fact that the American people, even in a state like California, want policies that don't represent a far left agenda that moves us closer and closer to a Western European style socialist type democracy.
Agreed. Senator Thune, always a pleasure. Thank you for joining me, Senator. Really enjoy it, and I appreciate the time. Time for me to remind you, relieffactor.com. Thom Tillis coming up after the break, but I do take this opportunity to tell you, first, go get to the Angel Tree banner at HughHewitt.com and help those kids get some relief this summer. Then, two, get relief for yourself with relieffactor.com. $19.95 gets that first bag on the way to you. And I take it every morning on the air in the first hour. I remind you, hours 2 and 3 to take it so you don't leave the house without it. Go out and get your exercise, relieffactor.com. And please subscribe to Honor Bound Coffee. Get your coffee, your morning brew from the company, 100% of the profits of which go to support military families. Honor Bound Coffee. Because we're honor bound to support these people. Please do by getting your coffee from honorboundcoffee.com. I'll be right back with Senator Tillis. Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt, joined now by North Carolina's great Senator Thom Tillis. Good morning, Senator. How are you?
Good morning, Hugh. I hope you're healthy.
I am, and you too, and I look forward to talking to you about the plan on China. I'd have to ask you about your colleague, though. Senator Burr served a search warrant. They stole it. They didn't steal. They seized his phone last night. Look, I believe in the Menendez rule. He hadn't been charged. He hadn't been convicted. He can stay in the Senate. But I don't know how anyone can be the chair of Intel when he's been served an FBI search warrant. Do you?
Well, I think that's something that, as they worked out with Menendez, is something between the Senator Burr and the leader. I do believe, as I said before, he owes us all an explanation, and I was well aware of the fact that an investigation's moving forward. We just need to see where the investigation ends.
I just hope when the caucus gets together, you'll raise the fact that I believe in the Menendez precedent, but he just being on Intel makes me upset. Senator, China really upsets me. And you have this very elaborate plan, which I have in front of me, and it's 17 pages of what we should do about the CCP. I want to go to the defense spending part of that. Will any phase 4 include that $20 billion, $20.1 billion for the Pacific Deterrence Initiative?
Well, I think it has to, and I think there's a general consensus among Republican members. So we're going to be fighting for that. It's critically important, Hugh. If you think about it, China right now, I think we could be at risk of them trying to create a diversion away from their catastrophic handling of the pandemic. And that's why we've got to be able to match up with them in the Pacific Rim.
And so what is that? But $20 billion is just $20 billion. What do you want to spend it on?
Well, there's a number of things that the DoD have come to us in terms of resources, some of it classified. And let's just say that we know that the people who cover that region will put it to good use.
All right. Now, Senator Tillis, let me ask you about the liability of state-sponsored enterprises. I just was talking with John Thune. We need liability protection for American businesses, but we all know that none of this would have happened except for the CCP's lying and deceit. Should we not open up their enterprises in the United States, which are controlled by the government, to suit by American companies that have been injured by this pandemic?
I think that has to be on the table. You're absolutely right. When people talk about these government-owned enterprises, they're nothing more than an economic arm of the Communist Party. And I do believe that is one of, between sanctions, a number of other economic measures that we're talking about that we have to put on the table. Look, China, there's one report that says that 95% of the cases could have been reduced if China just acted 3 weeks earlier and fully shared their information. They own this health and economic crisis, and they have to be held accountable. This has to create a memorable moment in a regime that has a 1,000-year-old memory so that this never happens again.
You know, Senator, I am not optimistic about that because the communists are the communists are the communists. They don't change, but we can certainly change our law to make them vulnerable to pay damages for the Americans they have injured. Is that something you'll push for?
That's right. If you take a look at our plan, we're trying to move on several fronts. In some cases, we'll help advance legislation that's going to be offered by other senators. In other cases, we'll be the original sponsors of a series of bills that will be rolling out in the coming weeks.
You also have in here countering China propaganda, Senator. And I see this everywhere. It's subtle sometimes. People say, oh, America wouldn't be so bad off if we had PPE. That's not the way tort law works. You look for who committed the injury. It's not the people. You don't blame the victim. You go after the perp. And do we have any way of pointing out to the media what they're doing? They are assisting the CCP in muddying the water.
Well, yeah, Hugh, you get as frustrated with the media as I do. I think we've got to go straight to the American people and build a case. That's why we're putting this plan out there. Republicans and Democrats, I've done 38 telephone town halls, and on a bipartisan, overwhelming basis, everyone believes that China needs to be held accountable. We need to use every legal, constitutional means to do that.
All right, last question. Should we sell F-35s to Taiwan?
I actually, we've got to do it with the advice of the State Department and the DoD, but I'm wide open to that because I worry about if you think about things that China may do to shift attention away from their responsibility for the pandemic and to maybe muster the Chinese population, which is not particularly pleased with their regime right now, you've got to look at those sorts of areas where we've got to assert or project some power.
Yeah, that is their history. The invasion of Vietnam, the invasion of Tibet, the war with India, they have sudden spasms of military violence marked by quick withdrawals. But with Taiwan, they wouldn't be withdrawing. I mean, they used to shell Taiwan.
That's right. Look, I spent a lot of time studying China. I'm a co-chair of the Human Rights Caucus. We look at things that they're doing in China. They have a despicable track record on every score, and this is the time for us to we've got to keep our attention focused on the threat that we have here in the United States, but we've got to eliminate the future potential by constantly, consistently, and without end focusing on China going forward.
On the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese people are great friends of America, and Chinese Americans are great patriots, but the CCP, bad actors. Senator Tillis, Communist Party. Senator Tillis, always a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Generalissimo. Thanks all of you for listening. I'll be back tomorrow with the Friday edition of the Hugh Hewitt Show.